The Big Light presents.
They would periodically ask me if I was gay, or they would, they would find things in my internet search history and things like that, and I would always just adamantly deny it.
My name is Halina Rafai, and this is the A Sonic Hug podcast. Over the coming episodes, you're going to hear the voices of people from different walks of life who deal, experience and battle mental health issues. In this episode, I meet musician Pedro Cameron. Scotland, as beautiful as it is, can also be exceptionally challenging. Communities are ever changing, especially in the more rural areas of the country. And when it comes to finding yourself, it can often be difficult or take more time. You're going to hear about Pedro's exploration of his sexuality and identity whilst growing up in the Highlands and his journey going forwards. There will be some discussion that will be difficult to hear, including suicidal ideation. This is Pedro's story.
I have experienced a lot of periods of depression in my life, anxiety, loss of identity, all kind of through my teenage years and my 20s. And I think that all relates to growing up as a gay person in the Highlands of Scotland, basically. When I was growing up, we moved house a lot and I moved school a lot. So I went to 5 different primary schools, 2 different high schools. So I was always kind of the new kid wherever I went. Didn't have a lot of time to form solid friendships and relationships outside of my family. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3", and I've always been tall and broad and always had weight issues as well. I kind of started to realize that there was something different about me quite early on. My parents talk about me being obsessed with mermaids when I was growing up and Disney princess movies and wanting to play with Barbies and stuff like that. And I always found it really difficult to relate to people, to engage with people. As I said, just always being the new kid at school and being shy and sensitive, but also being tall and broad. I was bullied quite a lot. About the age of 12 or 13, that was when I started to realize that I was having feelings towards men. And I didn't have anyone in my life that reflected that. No one at school that reflected that. Didn't see anything on TV or anything really. So I started to become aware of that when I first went to high school. And I think a big part of me, because of all the other things I've mentioned about always being a new kid, overweight, sort of sensitive, shy, etc., that was another thing about me that I didn't understand and wasn't able to control. And so I really started to kind of hide that aspect of myself. I found it was something that I felt like I could control people's perception of. So yeah, all through high school and into after I left school, I came out eventually when I was 19. But up until that point, I was so adamant that I wasn't gay. And my parents would ask me, and in the nicest terms, I've got really amazing parents, but they would periodically ask me if I was gay, or they would find things in my internet search history and things like that, and I would always just adamantly deny it. And as I got older, into sort of 15, 16, up to the age of 19, once I started to gather a few friends, they would ask me, and I would just deny. When you're hiding that big a part of yourself, you have to lie all the time. When you lie about something, you have to lie about something else. You have to cover up the thing that you lied about before. You have to elaborate that story. And then it became almost like a proactive thing. I was actively trying to present as straight by saying that I fancied girls, by buying lads mags, So basically I just pushed it down, down, down until a point where I almost believed it myself. And it got to a point where I didn't really know what was true, what was, what I'd lied about, forgotten what I'd lied about, and that seemed to seep into other areas of my life. So I think it made my self-esteem very, very low. And I would end up lying about other things that weren't even really anything to do with my sexuality, but almost to try and impress people or distract people from the parts of myself that I didn't like. That became sort of all-consuming sort of through my teenage years. I didn't really have a lot of sort of gay experiences when I was a teenager. I think I had some infatuations for sure. And like any teenager does, like fell in love with people in your year at school or whatever. I had one maybe when I was about 14 with someone who I went to school with, and it was kind of just like a weird sort of energy, I suppose, in the room. I remember going to his house and him showing me, I think he showed me some like videos on the internet, like porn or something like that on the internet. And we kind of watched it together, but then I didn't really know what the response was supposed to be. Like, I didn't know why I was being shown this, if it was to sort of tell me something or if it was to laugh at it or what it was. So yeah, that was the only real sort of gay experience I had, probably until I was about 19. I probably didn't really realize the impact it was having on my mental health until I was maybe about 23, 24. I came out when I was 19 and there was a brief period of relief and sort of freeness, which was great. And my actual coming out story is pretty boring. And it turned out that it was all fine and I had no real negative, but it was kind of the stuff that led up to it. When I left school when I was 17 and then left home straight away and moved to Dundee. I lived with a guy who was in the year above me at school. And I was still not out of the closet yet at this point. And I ended up having, well, two things: a very, very hedonistic lifestyle, sort of partying all the time. And I was using that, I think, just to get through it, just as escapism, I suppose. I was living with this guy who was a year older than me, and he was kind of a bit of a question mark sexually. There were sort of rumors about that he had been with other guys that we knew, but it was all kind of hearsay, And he sort of ended up kind of manipulating me a lot when we were living together. So kind of preyed on my lack of any sort of identity. I didn't know who I was at all. All I knew was that I needed to pretend I wasn't gay and to try and be an interesting person to people, which seems like a bit of a dichotomy now. I was still lying kind of all the time at this point. So I was with this guy for in this flat for about a year. He was just bleeding me dry. I was paying for everything, but I wasn't really paying for anything. Like, my parents were paying for it, and like my lifestyle, but also his lifestyle. And he was sort of leading me on, I suppose. I think he knew that he must have known that I was gay and that I was attracted to him, and it became kind of a bit of an infatuation. That was kind of a really dark period. And I fell out with my parents for quite a long time around that. And I was just draining them of money and using it to do what I wanted, go clubbing and stuff. And I was just doing that all the time, and also feeding his needs and wants. Eventually it kind of came to head, and I moved out of that flat and lived on my own for a while. My parents were still supporting me, and I wasn't really doing anything. I'd moved to Dundee to go to college, so I dropped out of college. Then I lived on my own for about 6 months in a one-bedroom flat. I was still kind of being leached off of by this guy. He would come and stay at my flat whenever he wanted. He would have parties in my flat when I wasn't there. Simultaneously, I was getting myself into like huge amounts of debt. And there was just a really dark period where the lack of identity got worse and worse until I just was constantly in a state of blackness. it's difficult when you feel that way to know how to get out of it because you don't know what the real you is. And to a certain extent, what you're doing is the real you because it's happening. And those are the things you're doing and the choices that you're making. There were stretches of days and weeks where I wasn't getting out of bed. I was suicidal. I used to walk out to like the Tay Bridge on quite a regular basis thinking that that's what I was going to do. There was always something there that prevented me from doing that, but I was seriously kind of considering it. Eventually, I had a sort of a realization that time is very hazy. My memories of it are so strange because of all the lies. It's kind of hard to separate what really happened and what were things that I told people that happened. I think my parents didn't know who I was, and I've got wonderful parents. They're just so understanding and they put up with a lot around that sort of time. And the interesting thing is that during this time, people would still ask me if I was gay. They would urge me that it was fine if I was and that they would still love me. And so by this point, I had a small group of good friends at this point and people that I was partying with for sure, but some of them really did care about me and I'm still friends with now. And my parents were doing the same. They were like, please just know that if you're gay, then it's fine. But I think the fear is that if I came clean about that, everything else would kind of unravel and I would have to kind of own up to all the things that had happened in like almost a period of 7 years, I suppose. At one point, I went home after living in that flat on my own. I was really struggling. I had no money. I was surviving on digestive biscuits that like would be what I was eating. That was all I had, that and water. And it got to a stage where I remember going to a phone box. I had no credit in my phone and using my last like bit of change to phone my dad to come and get me. And I moved home for a little while and kind of tried to recuperate a wee bit. During that period while I was at home after that, I started to explore like online gay dating sites and stuff like that and started to speak to people a little bit. And I had a small thing with a guy and I think I just had a moment of like, what am I doing? I was like, what is this? I really wasn't taking care of myself either. That's the thing. So along with all that sort of like, I wasn't looking after myself, my appearance, or it was like the kind of this fabricated world was the real world. And what I was actually presenting to people was not what I thought was coming across, if that makes sense. I think that thought I was presenting an image of myself that just wasn't reflected on the outside and wasn't believable. And, I wasn't washing, like I wasn't cleaning my clothes, like, and in such a kind of fantasy land inside my head that anyway, I'd started myself out a little bit when I was at home and then start to see this guy. And then I came out to a friend over the phone. I remember sitting in my room at my parents' house and telling them, and it was just a sort of euphoric kind of finally moment. Yeah, the relief was really huge. And I remember following that, I went downstairs and told my sister, I was speaking to my sister and she said something about how she wanted a boyfriend and and I responded, yeah, me too. That was my way of coming out to my sister. And then it turned out that my mum was in the next room and had heard the conversation. So I came downstairs the next day and my dad was sitting at the kitchen table and was like, so you finally came out, did you? And that was it. And they were just really supportive and really great. And there was a real honeymoon period of where I was like, oh, this relief and everything's going to be okay now. But I think following that, it doesn't happen just overnight. It's hard to explain. I think I just sort of all the learned behaviors that I had been acquiring since I was a teenager or younger were still instinctive. And so it took a long time to shake that. And I spent a couple of years still having kind of a strained relationship with my parents. They wouldn't let me stay in their house. I was still having trouble with debt and money problems. I would spend money very compulsively and I would do things very compulsively. That was probably another year or so that I was still like that. I then went to university in Glasgow. Again, had a moment of right, I'm going to sort myself out. So I went to study English at Glasgow Uni, went to halls at the age of 21. I don't think I was ready. I don't think I'd fully gotten a grip of myself yet, and I was still in pretty dark place and still had really terrible self-esteem. And I think that's actually lasted to this day. I have self-esteem issues. But at that point, so this is about 10 years ago now. So I spent a year at university basically just going out all the time. During that time, when I was in halls, it was quite an intense environment. I was in like a 12-person flat, and I still wasn't sure who I was yet. That was another very long, dark year, and I was spending all my money again. It kind of took me up to that point. And then things started to really brighten up following that year. It was around that time that I joined a band. I used to play in a band called the Dirty Beggars. They were a sort of country, Americana, bluegrass kind of band. And I joined them playing fiddle in about, I think that was 2011. I think it was about 22 when I joined them. That was great, and started to really cultivate before I'd only ever had very small amount of people that I would call friends. And then once I joined that band, and I'd sort of started to garner like a big group of friends and a lot of people that I trusted, and started to really finally felt like I had a place where I could kind of be myself. I think that music really kind of was a bit of a lifesaver for me. I think it was something that I felt that I was good at and I was doing well at. And yeah, I really started to feel like a real person, which I don't think for a long time I'd never felt like that. I'd always felt like a fake person that I'd been made up almost, or I didn't know what the real person was. I haven't really seen professionals that much. I've been on antidepressants on and off since I was probably about 20. When I was around 24, 25, I saw a CBT therapist for a couple of sessions, which did help. That kind of introduced me to mindfulness a little bit, and made me really start to think about who I was like as a person, and really sort of examine that. But I think the thing for me was, I think I had to work it out for myself. A lot of my mental health issues have been related to negative behavior patterns. I really needed to recognize them for myself. Maybe if I had some help, it would have arrived a bit faster. In all honesty, I think the fact that I have put the work in and examined myself makes the result that I feel now like I've earned it, I suppose. That I've earned my relative sort of good mental health now. I still have problems. I still have depressive episodes. I still have real anxiety. It's a really big part of my life, and I'm definitely not all the way there yet, but at least I have a good sense of who I am as a person now, and like myself a lot better now. I don't hate myself anymore. I like who I am, and I like what I stand for. I don't know if I need to speak to someone. I think I have a lot of people in my life that I can speak to, and I feel that I can be honest about my past. I still feel like it's about taking responsibility for myself. I feel in a good place now. As I said, there's still things to work on, but I think that's true for everyone. In a way, I think that what happened growing up was formative, and I don't really know what would have helped, because on paper, I had all the things that a lot of people who grow up gay could wish for. I had a supportive family. A lot of it is circumstantial. I think that the moving school a lot might have had an impact on that, but I don't want to blame anyone for that. I don't want to blame. My parents were doing the best they could. And what that meant was sometimes we had to move to the next job that had more money. We grew up in sort of relative poverty, I would say, until I was a teenager. So they just had to try and provide for us. And that just meant that while I wasn't able to forge long relationships with people, I think in a way that now has worked in my favor. I think I had a dark time, but I've learned a lot about myself I think I know myself really well now. And that's due to the things that went on and the way that I felt and the things that I did. So it's hard for me to say that what I wish I had, because I can't change that now. So sometimes I think that doesn't necessarily feel that helpful, because it is what it is. And I've come out the other side. I am who I am, and I'm pretty happy with who I am and how I've turned out. I wish for my parents that hadn't happened. That was really, really dark and hard for them as well. They did all they could to help me during that time. And I wish that I could take that back from them. And I wish that I trusted myself more and I trusted them more. Of course, I wish that I could have had sort of air quotes normal teenage years, or sort of that time had been easier for me. It's just made me who I am now. And I feel like I've got quite a lot of life experience, and I've been able to, I think without all that happening, I wouldn't actually be able to do the things that I get to do now. For example, Boafrosh, which is a program that I run for queer traditional and folk musicians. And I wish that I had something like that when I was younger, but the fact that I wouldn't have started it if I didn't wish that. I would say to someone who is worried about who they are, and if a little gay queer kid in the Highlands of Scotland or on an island somewhere or wherever they are, I would say that who you are is okay, and there's a community, I think, for everyone. And I think it's a lot more accessible now than it maybe was when I was a teenager. It's maybe a lot easier to find your tribe or to see yourself reflected. But what I would say to someone is that you can create or you can't create a version of yourself. You can't do that. And I think the more that you accept yourself, and there will be many people who will accept you for who you are. And while you might not be able to see that now, and you might not be able to see them, they are there and they will come, I think, is what I would say.
That was Pedro's story. I want to start by thanking him sincerely for talking to me. One of the things that stuck out for me from the onset was how Pedro says that he had no time for friendship or relationships. This could be put down to his family movements, but I want to focus more on the importance of having human connection, especially from an early age. For many of us, it brings growth, confidence, compassion, love and trust. That then can let us explore our own identities, beliefs, and provide spaces for experience. The hard thing to say here is that I wonder if Pedro had those friendships and relationships from an early age, would things be drastically different or had been easier for him? It's impossible to tell, as he says, he doesn't blame his parents for moving around as they were doing the best they could. And that brings us back to the subject of compassion. Many of us find it very hard to lay blame at the doors of those we love. We have more understanding about our lived experiences with those people and can generally see everything they have tried to do for us. And even if at the time we struggle with things, we can often look back and recognise that they were doing what they could. Another thing to remember is that Pedro's parents asked about his sexuality on numerous occasions, and he openly says that they love him, so it begs the question as to why Pedro internalised things so much. I am no psychologist or therapist, so it's unfair for me to make suggestions or assumptions, but I do like to ask questions, and I think it's important for us to look at Pedro's experience growing up and remember it when considering other children and young people's experiences. Growing up in rural areas can be a blessing and a curse. As someone that has, it can pose a less representative aspect of the world, but the same could be argued for anywhere else in the world. But we then turn to things like TV and films and media overall. We're at times constantly trying to find people we can identify with who are perhaps not present in our circle. So the importance of having diversity within our streams is vital. As much as we look to protect and control what young people see, there are also ways of showing them the wider world and the people in it. Pedro, similar to Paul in my first episode of this series, talks about the impact of lying. the way that it built up and the toll it took on his life, the stress of having to remember lies and this affecting things like self-esteem, but above all, the burden of simply not being able to be your true self and feel as if you can't speak honestly. That in itself is utterly exhausting for many. Coming out is a very individual experience, and other feelings that associate with it are fear of rejection, confusion, anxiety, and sometimes shame. Ultimately, this is about who we love and have relationships with. Why do we still have so many issues as a society when it comes to gender? How many times must we just remember the importance of a soul loving another? I'm so glad that Pedro found out about the power of creativity. He, like so many others, found his tribe and made real and lasting friendships. It further highlights how crucial cultural activities are when it comes to promoting the health and well-being of people, because as Pedro says, there's a community for everyone. If you have experienced or are experiencing anything described in this episode, you will find support information in the text to accompany this podcast. A Sonic Hug is recorded, edited and produced by me, Halina Rafai. We are also part of Scotland's podcasting network, The Big Light. Until next time, deep breaths.
From the Big Light Studio.